Section 8 of Little Journeys to the Homes of English Authors. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Little Journeys to the Homes of English Authors by Elbert Hubbard. Section 8. Samuel Johnson, Part 1. 7 years, my lord, have now passed since I waited in your outward rooms and was repulsed from your door, during which time I have been pushing on my work through difficulties of which it is useless to complain, and have brought it at last to the verge of publication, without one act of assistance, one word of encouragement, or one smile of favour. Such treatment I did not expect, for I never had a patron before. The shepherd in Virgil grew at last acquainted with love, and found him a native of the rocks. Is not a patron, my lord, one who looks with unconcern on a man struggling for life in the water, and, when he has reached the ground, encumbers him with help? The notice which you have been pleased to take of my labours, had it been early, had been kind. But it has been delayed till I am indifferent, and cannot enjoy it, till I am a solitary, and cannot impart it, till I am known, and do not want it. I hope it is no very cynical asperity not to confess obligations where no benefit has been received, or to be unwilling that the public should consider me as owing that to a patron which Providence has enabled me to do for myself. Having carried on my work thus far with so little obligation to any favourer of learning, I shall not be disappointed, though I should conclude it, should less be possible, with less. For I have been long wakened from that dream of hope in which I once boasted myself with so much exultation, my lord. Your lordship's most humble, most obedient servant, Sam Johnson. The critics, I believe, have made a distinction between large men and great men. Samuel Johnson was both. He was massive in intellect, colossal in culture, prodigious in memory, weighed nigh 300 pounds, and had prejudices to match. He was possessed of a giant's strength, and occasionally used it like a giant. For instance, when he felled an offending bookseller with a folio. Johnson was most unfortunate in his biographer. In picturing the great writer, Boswell writes more entertainingly than Johnson ever did, and thereby overtops his subject. And when, in reply to the intimation that Boswell was going to write his life, Johnson answered, "If I really thought he was, I would take his," he spoke a jest in earnest. Walking along Market Street in the city of St. Louis with a friend, not long ago, my comrade suddenly stopped and excitedly pointed out a man across the way. "Look, quick, there he goes," exclaimed my friend, "that man with the derby and duster, see? That's the husband of Mrs. Lease of Kansas." And all I could say was, God help him. Not but that Mrs. Lease is a most excellent and amiable lady, but the idea of a man, made in the image of his Maker, being reduced to the social state of a drone bee, is most depressing. Among that worthy class of people referred to somewhat ironically as the reading public, Boswell is read, but Johnson never. And so sternly true is the fact that many critics, set on a hair trigger, aver that were it not for Boswell, no one would now know that a writer by the name of Johnson ever lived. Yet the fact is, Boswell ruined the literary reputation of Johnson by intimating that Johnson wrote Johnsonese. But that is a mistake. Johnson never wrote Johnsonese. The piling up of reasons, the cumulation of an argument, setting off epigram against epigram, that mark Johnson's literary style, are its distinguishing features. He is profound, but always lucid, and lucidity is just what modern Johnsonese lacks. The word was coined by a man who had neither the patience to read Johnson nor the ability to comprehend him. Only sophomores and private secretaries who write speeches for able congressmen write Johnsonese. Quibblers possibly may arise and present Johnson's definition of network. Anything reticulated or decussated at equal distances with interstices between the intersections. But with the quibbler we have no time to dally. Some people insist on having their literature illustrated, just as others refuse to attend lectures that are not reinforced by a stereopticon. Johnson had a style that is stately, dignified, splendid. It moves from point to point with absolute precision, and in it there is seldom anything ambiguous, muddy, confused, or uncertain. Get down a volume of Lives of the Poets and prove my point for yourself by opening at any page. It was Boswell who set his own light, chatting, and amusing gossip over against the wise, stately diction of Johnson, and allowed Goldsmith to say, "Dear Doctor, if you were to write a story about little fishes, you would make them talk like whales." And the mudball has stuck. The average man is much more willing to take the wily Boswell's word for it than to read Johnson for himself. The balanced power of Johnson's English cannot fail to delight the student of letters who cares to interest himself in the matter of sentence building. Johnson handles a thought with such ease. He makes you think of the circus strongman who tosses the cannon ball marked weight 250 pounds. What if the balls are sometimes only wood painted black? Have we not been entertained? Read this specimen paragraph. Criticism is a study by which men grow important and formidable at very small expense. The power of invention has been conferred by nature upon few, and the labor of learning those sciences which may by continuous effort be obtained is too great to be willingly endured. But every man can exert such judgment as he has upon the works of others, and he whom nature has made weak and idleness keeps ignorant may yet support his vanity by the name of critic. But the greatest literary light of his day has been thrown into the shadow by a man whom no one suspected of being able to write entertainingly. In the world of letters, the great Cham exists only as a lesser luminary, just as the once noted novelist George Henry Lewis is now known only as the husband of George Eliot. And yet no one is so rash as to say that the name of Boswell would now be known were it not for Johnson. And conversely, or otherwise, if it were the proper place, I could show that if it were not for George Henry Lewis, we should never have had Adam Bede or The Mill on the Floss. Boswell wrote the best life ever written. Nothing like it was ever written before. Nothing to equal it has been written since. It has had hundreds of imitators, but no competitors. Matthew Arnold said that no man ever had so good a subject, but Arnold, for the moment, seemed to forget that Hawkins, a professional literary man, published his Life of Johnson long before Boswell's was sent to the printer. And who reads Hawkins? Surely Boswell had a great subject, and he rises to the level of his theme and makes the most of it. At times I have wondered if Boswell were not really a genius, so great and profound that he was willing to play the fool, as Edgar in Lear plays the maniac, and allows himself to be snubbed, in print, in order to make his telling point. Millionaires can well afford to wear ragged coats. Second-rate man Boswell may have been, as he himself so oft admits, yet as a biographer he stands first in the front rank. But suppose his extreme ignorance was only the domino disguising a cleverness so subtle that it was not discovered until after his death? And what if he smiles now, as from out of Elysium he looks and beholds how, as a writer, he has eclipsed old Ursa Major, and thus clipped the claws that were ready for any chance Scot who might pass that way? John Hay has suggested that possibly the insight, piquancy, and calm wisdom of Omer Khayyam are 2/3 essence of Fitzgerald. If so, the joke is on Omar, not on Fitzgerald. A dozen of Johnson's contemporaries wrote about him, and all make him out a profound scholar, a deep philosopher, a facile writer. Boswell, by his innocent quoting and recounting, makes his conversation outstrip all of his other accomplishments. He reveals the man by the most skilful indirection, and by leaving his guard down, often allows the reader to score a point. And of all devices of writing folk, none is finer than to please the reader by allowing him to pat himself on the back. If a writer is too clever, he repels. Shakespeare avoids the difficulty and proves himself the master by keeping out of sight. Renan wins by a great show of modesty and deferential fairness. Boswell assumes an artlessness and ignorance that were really not parts of his nature. Every man who reads Boswell considers himself the superior of Boswell, and therefore is perfectly at home. It is not pleasant to be in the society of those who are much your superiors. Any man who sits in the company of Samuel Pepys for a half-hour feels a sort of half-patronizing pity for him, and therefore is happy, for to patronize is bliss. If Boswell has reinforced fact with fiction, and given us art for truth, then his character of Samuel Johnson is the most vividly conceived and deeply etched in all the realm of books. But if he gives merely the simple facts, then Boswell is no less a genius, for he has omitted the irrelevant and inconsequential, and by playing off the excellent against the absurd, he has placed his subject among the few great wits who have ever lived. A man who wrote remarkably well, but talked infinitely better. Montaigne advises young men that if they will fall in love, why, to fall in love with women older than themselves. His argument is that a young and pretty woman makes such a demand on a man's time and attention that she is sure, eventually, to wear love to the warp. So the wise old Gascon suggests that it is part of wisdom to give your affection to one who is both plain and elderly, one who is not suffering from a surfeit of love, and one whose head has not been turned by flattery. Young women, says the philosopher, demand attention as their right and often flout the giver, whereas old women are very grateful. Whether Samuel Johnson of Lichfield ever read Montaigne or not is a question, but this we know, that when he was 26 he married the widow Porter, aged 49. Assuming that Johnson had read Montaigne and was mindful of his advice, there were other excellent reasons why he did not link his fortunes with those of a young and pretty woman. Johnson, in his youth, as well as throughout life, was a grind of the pure type. The grind is a fixture, a few being found at every university, even unto this day. The present writer, once in a book of fiction, founded on fact, took occasion to refer to the genus grind, with Samuel Johnson in mind, as follows. He is poor in purse, but great in frontal development. He goes to school because he wishes to. No one ever sent a grind to college. He has sallow skin, a watery eye, a shambling gait, but he has the facts. His clothes are outgrown, his coat shiny, his linen a dull ecru, his hands clammy. He reads a book as he walks, and when he bumps into you, he always exculpates himself in Attic Greek. This absent-mindedness and habit of reading on the street affords the sport, another college type, great opportunity for the playing of pranks. It is very funny to walk along in front of a grind who is reading as he walks, and then suddenly stop and stoop, and let the grind fall over you. For the innocent grind, thinking he has been at fault, is ever profuse in apologies. Many years ago there was a grind. A party of sports saw him approaching, deeply immersed in his book. "Look you," quoth the chief of the sports, "look you, and observe him fall over me." And they looked. Onward blindly trudged the grind, reading as he came. The sport stepped ahead of him, stooped, and one big foot of the grind shot out and kicked him into the gutter. Then the grind continued his walk and his reading without saying a word. This incident is here recorded for the betterment of the young, to show them that things are not always what they seem. Samuel Johnson, as I have said, was a grind of the pure type. He was so nearsighted that he fell over chairs in drawing-rooms, and so awkward that his long arms occasionally brushed the bric-a-brac from mantels. No lady's train was safe if he was in the room. At gatherings of young people, if Johnson appeared, his presence was at once the signal for mirth, of which he was, of course, the unconscious object. Johnson's face was scarred by the king's evil, which even the touch of Queen Anne had failed to cure. While a youth he talked aloud to himself, a privilege that should be granted only to those advanced in years. He would grunt out prayers and expletives at uncertain times, keep up a clucking sound with his tongue, sway his big body from side to side, and drum a tattoo upon his knee. Now and again would come a suppressed whistle, and then a low humming sound, backed up by a vacant, non-compos mentis smile. Another odd whim of Johnson's was that he would never pass a lamp-post without touching it, and would go back miles upon his way to repair an omission. Surely great wit to madness is near allied. This most strange young man was a boarder in the house of Mrs. Porter, when her husband was alive, and the husband and boarder had been fast friends, drawn together by a bookish bias. Very naturally, when the husband passed away, the boarder sought to console the bereaved landlady, and the result was as usual. And when, long years after, Johnson would solemnly explain that it was a pure love match on both sides, the statement never failed to excite much needless and ill-suppressed merriment on the part of the listeners. In mimicking the endearments of Johnson and his pretty creature, so the admiring husband called her, Garrick many years later added to his artistic reputation. Unlike most literary men, Johnson was domestic, and his marriage was one of the most happy events of his career. But to show that the philosophy of Montaigne is not infallible, and that all signs fail in dry weather, it may be stated that the bride proved by her conduct on her wedding day that she had some relish of the saltness of time in her cosmos, despite her 50 summers and as many hard winters. Said Johnson to Boswell, referring to the horseback ride home after the wedding ceremony, "Sir, she had read the old romances, and had got into her head the fantastical notion that a woman of spirit should use her lover like a dog. So, sir, at first she told me that I rode too fast, and she could not keep up with me, and when I rode a little slower, she passed me and complained that I lagged behind. I was not to be made the slave of caprice, and I resolved to begin as I meant to end. I therefore pushed on briskly till I was fairly out of sight. The road lay between 2 hedges, so I was sure she could not miss it, and I contrived that she should soon come up with me. When she did, I observed her to be in tears." Shortly after his marriage, Johnson opened a private school for boys. To operate a private school successfully implies a certain amount of skill in the management of parents. But Johnson's uncouth manners and needlessly blunt speech were appalling to those who had children who might possibly be given to imitation. Only 3 pupils were secured, and but one of these received any benefit from the tutor, and this benefit came, according to the scholar, from the master's supplying an excellent object for ridicule. This pupil's name was David Garrick. The meeting with David Garrick was a pivotal point in the life of Johnson. Johnson's mental and spiritual existence flowed on, separate and apart from that of his wife. There was no meeting of the waters. His affection for her was most tender and constant, but in quality it seemed to differ but slightly from the sentiment he entertained toward Hodge, his cat. Hodge was fed on oysters that his owner could ill afford, and after Johnson had spent the little fortune that belonged to his wife, the lady was regaled on the best and choicest that his income, or credit, could secure. But if one of those lightning flashes of wit ever escaped him in her direction, we do not know it. Garrick evidently was the first flint that tried his steel. The distinctions of teacher and scholar were soon lost between these two, and the lessons took the turn of a fusillade of wit. They made comments on the authors they read, and comments on the people they met, and criticized each other with encaustic remarks that tested friendship to its extremest limit. And this continual skirmish that would have made sworn foes of common men in a day revealed to each that the other had the element of unexpectedness in his nature and was worth loving. Humor and melancholy go hand in hand. Both are born of an extreme sensitiveness, and the man who smiles at the trivial misfits of life realizes also that all men who tread the earth are living under a sentence of death, and that fate has merely allowed them an indefinite but limited reprieve. End of section 8.